Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 2 of season 3 of The Flash, Paradox. And here is where we get to see the fallout of Barry's tinkering with the timeline, creating Flashpoint, and then undoing it. Now, I definitely like this episode a good bit more than I did the last episode, but it does still sort of suffer from that sort of alternate reality consequences, circumstances that they've never really gone down particularly well with me. And that's not really a fault of the show, it's just my personal preferences. But I will say that this episode does handle all of this in a pretty good way. There were only a few times where I just sort of started getting those hackles on my neck rising up from when I'm sort of dealing with the stuff from any sort of source that I don't particularly care for. So let's just get right into it. So obviously, because Barry mucked with the timeline yet again, there's quite a few things that are different. Joe and Iris have a crummy relationship. Dante's dead. Cisco is bearing an enormous amount of resentment against Barry for refusing to go back in time and alter and save his brother. And of course, there's stuff going on with Caitlin, as we discover she apparently is getting her Killer Frost powers. And we also have Julian Albert now working at the police station, and Barry has no idea who this dude is. So there's also the whole thing with Sarah and with John Diggle's kid. So a lot of stuff's going on here. So let's just kind of get right into it. So speaking of the whole Sarah thing, I suppose we might as well start there. One, very cool to see Felicity on the show again. Always nice to see her and Barry bouncing off of each other. And at this point, in the first part of the episode, she's the only person that knows that in the the original history, that John had a daughter rather than a son. There's just no way this is not going to cause some sort of a major confrontation between Barry and John at some point in the future. I mean, it's just too juicy not to do. And this, of course, also sort of brings to the point that, remember, Connor Hawke, real name was John Diggle Jr. So so that now means that the Connor Hawke that we saw in Legends of Tomorrow now exists in the Arrowverse proper, which I suppose you could take as a sign that bad future is going to come to pass, but I sort of doubt it. But the idea that there will potentially be a Connor Hawke in the Arrowverse is nonetheless extremely intriguing, and it's always the possibility that they could bring him back on Legends of Tomorrow or something like that in the future. Or somehow bring some of the time travel stuff onto Arrow. That would be extraordinarily interesting for John, and to sort of have to deal with his son as a grown man from the future who's basically turned into Oliver Queen. So again, interesting stuff there. Speaking of telling people the secret, this is another episode that really illustrates a great point of writing, in that Barry decides initially to keep what's going on here a secret from everybody. Because of course he does. If he immediately comes clean, there's a lot of the story just goes right out the window. Characters have to make mistakes like this for the sake of good drama. And of course you see Barry just flailing around in this universe, trying to get it to sort of bend to his will to make things whole again. I'm sort of suddenly reminded of that line from the end of Fallout 4. I thought I could cheat time, save my family, and all of that the sole survivor gives at the very end of that. Also, a little speech that actually fits very well with Rip Hunter, now that I think about it. But anyway, that of course completely blows up in his face, and in the end he does have to come clean with everybody about what he did. And ultimately, he goes and he tries to change history yet again, which leads to that really fantastic scene with Jay Garrick. More than a few people noted that he takes Barry to a diner in 1998, and there's a TV playing Dawson's Creek on there. John Wesley Shipp was on Dawson's Creek, as with the fellow that played Professor Ivo. Greg Berlanti worked on Dawson's Creek. Sorry, somebody was pulling into my driveway. And of course, if you were around in 1998, you know Dawson's Creek was a very, very big deal at the time. What was it? The WB network. Yeah, that's what it was on. That was sort of the CW before it was the CW. 1998, season 2 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Good year for television. Actually, all in all, 1998 was a good year at all. At least for me, anyway. 2016 has not been such a great year for me, but say love it. Anywho, I really love that example that Jay gives about the broken teacup. Like, you can try and put it together as many times as you want, but it's never going to be exactly the same. And he says, like, well, what are you going to do, Barry? Are you going to go back in time and alter things every time you make a mistake, or are you going to accept it and move on? And this is extremely necessary as to why they do things like, well, why doesn't Barry just go back in time and fix it? Okay, because this is it. This explains why they're just not going to be using time travel as the solve everything problem. Because, and it's been stated again and again, even by Reverse Flash, you got to be careful about mucking up with history, or it's going to blow up in your face. So I'm glad they got that out of the way. And I also like that line that Jay says. It's like, we're not gods. We're just ordinary men who, for whatever reason, have been gifted with extraordinary abilities. Which is a really great line for Jay, and also something very in keeping with Superman's own philosophy of who he is. There was this one storyline in Justice League where the Justice League was kind of in this dream world, and they sort of showed their physical appearance changed to how they viewed themselves. And Superman's was him in these farmer overalls with the Superman cape. And that's really kind of who he sees himself. He's just like, Superman is just a disguise that Clark Kent puts on to go out and do good in the world. And here we see that Jay views himself in a very similar fashion. Nothing really particular to see about Caitlin other than looks like she's developing Killer Frost powers, so her becoming a metahuman does seem to be one of the things that was altered in the timeline, and she seems to be extremely concerned about that. So one would assume that the events of her interacting with her counterpart from Earth 2 were probably pretty much identical, so she has good reason to be worried. A little bit of shame they killed off Dante the way they did. Apparently, in this world, Cisco and he never mended fences like they did 2 times, although it did seem apparently more like it was going to stick that second time around. But one interesting thing here is that in this world, Cisco seems to have much better control over his metahuman abilities. And he even kind of says, after he saves Barry from the rival, it's like, maybe someday I'll go out there in a costume, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. I imagine that's something we'll probably see before the end of the season. Let's see. Nothing particularly huge to say about Jo. Iris, we kind of get a little bit of a reiteration of that speech she gives about how she and Barry will always find each other, which was nice. And of course, Barry is completely miserable this whole episode due to bad choices on his own part, which, of course, is one of the great cores of good drama. So Julian Albert, of course, played by Tom Felton, best known as Draco Malfoy from the Harry Potter movies. I'm glad that they're just letting him use his natural British accent here on the show. Little bit odd that there would be a British guy working for an American police department. But you know what? Hey, if they were able to do it on CSI New York, why not, right? But one thing I do like is that when he ultimately explains why he doesn't like Barry, he's like, I don't trust you, and I don't like people I don't trust. And if you stop and think about it, the people around Barry know Barry, they know he's a good guy, even though he's constantly coming up with these really ridiculous and extremely fishy excuses for various things. But because they know Barry and they know he's a decent guy, they just kind of go along with it. But if you introduce somebody into the mix for whom Barry is just a complete stranger, who they come into a situation around him with a completely neutral attitude, yeah, there is a good possibility that they might be suspicious of this guy, because Barry does lie to people around him all the time. He does act in a way that is very fishy. And Julian even points out, it's like, hey, you only know this stuff about Edward Claris because you stole evidence from my crime scene, which, as a CSI, he totally should not have done and probably could legally get into a lot of trouble for. So right there, Julia's actually does have pretty good reasons not to trust Barry. So that's a nice little touch there. Let's see. So nothing really huge to say about Edward Claris this episode. When we saw them the last time around, he was sleeping next to some lady who I assume is like his wife or his girlfriend. I think it would kind of been nice if that actually was something like that. And he kind of had to have this moment of like, well, do I really want to do this? I have this relationship going on. Do I really want to give all this up in order to become this person again? Some sort of acknowledgement of that. I guess that he could have just been a one-night stand or something, but still, it just sort of struck me as something that you'd think that they would have put that in there if there wasn't something to be done with it. Now, what's really interesting is that Dr. Alchemy is apparently transforming people into the Earth, the Flashpoint versions of himself. I mean, the rival even explicitly says, "Remember me, Flash." This is not the Edward Claris of Earth 1. This is Flashpoint Edward Claris. Now, how in the world is this possible? Well, Dr. Alchemy, we see him holding that thing, which is almost certainly the Philosopher's Stone, the source of Dr. Alchemy's powers in the comics. And it's implied that he's transformed other people into the Flashpoint versions of themselves, where in those realities they had powers. And when Barry kind of jives to this, he does spare a long look at Wally. Obviously, that would be a very interesting way to introduce Kid Flash into Earth 1. And a lot of drama could definitely come out of that. Let's see. Now, Dr. Alchemy isn't a character I know super well, so I don't really have a huge amount to say about him. We do have the fellow who did the voice of Jigsaw in the Saw movies coming in to do his voice. And then after Barry and Cisco defeat the rival, he gets locked up in Iron Heights. Alchemy pops up and says, "You have failed me," and then somebody with a gauntlet grabs him. Now, if you look carefully in the show, Dr. Alchemy is wearing regular gloves. This person is wearing gauntlets, so most likely it's Savitar, who's been announced as one of the villains for this season. And I'm definitely kind of interested to see what they do with him. He's a pretty formidable character. One thing I didn't like was the way that Cisco feels the need to slap Doctor onto the name there. It's like the guy's already given himself a name. Just adding something onto it seems laying it on a little bit too thick. Now, as for what Alchemy means by "I'm preparing the world for something," some people who are familiar with kind of the basic idea for the big 4-night crossover that's coming have suggested it might have something to do with that. I'd say that's a strong possibility. I'm not going to talk about what it is because I don't want to spoil things for people who might not be up on that particular bit. Plus, there's a number of other threats out there, so it's I think just a little too early to say. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? Nope, I think that covers everything I had to say about this episode. I mean, it's a good, solid episode. But I am glad that now we're going to be kind of getting back on track with things sort of business as usual. We can kind of just sort of move along from this reality altering stuff, which is, like I said, it's one of those things that you really have to be careful about for me, otherwise it's going to start rubbing me the wrong way. But in any case, it was reasonably well done, and thankfully it didn't go on too terribly long. So I'm definitely willing to, looking forward to sort of just the show kind of getting on with things and seeing where things go from here. So with that said, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.